compassion has a lot to do with living well to me. I see a lot of suffering in the world happening, I think, because people are disconnected from themselves, disconnected from their bodies, from their hearts. And compassion comes from here in the heart. If I don't have compassion for another person, I might not be kind to them. And that leads to suffering. And if someone's suffering and I have compassion, I might be able to help them.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Cherionna Menzam-Sills. Cherionna is a somatic prenatal and birth therapist, biodynamic craniosacral therapist, and a continuum teacher. Cherionna began teaching embodied embryology through somatic movement in 1997 as part of her doctoral studies in pre and perinatal psychology, which led her to teaching at Naropa University and the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute. She has taught and facilitated pre and perinatal psychology/therapy, Continuum, and biodynamic craniosacral therapy internationally. Cherionna currently offers online postgraduate training for practitioners to enhance their skill in recognizing and meeting prenatal and birth material arising in session work, as well as small wound surround process workshops. She has authored 3 books, The Breath of Life, An Introduction to Craniosacral Biodynamics, Spirit into Form, Exploring Embryological Potential and Prenatal Psychology, and A Prenatal Shadow, Healing Traumas Experienced Before and at Birth. Cherionna is committed in her work and life to embodied presence. Originally from Canada, she now lives with Franklyn in beautiful Devon, UK. Hi, Cherionna. How are you?
Hi, Broderick. Happy to be here. How are you?
I am well. I'm happy to be here as well and have this conversation with you. Looking forward to exploring this topic of living well with you. I've done a little craniosacral in my past, and I've come across your book in my past, so it's very interesting to have this conversation with you. I know this is not a podcast about craniosacral therapy, but I just wanted to say that I can only imagine some of your thoughts about the good life because of my prior work with craniosacral therapy and the potential and power of that practice.
Yeah.
So I know I just read that introduction, but I always like to ask guests to share a little bit about themselves before we delve into the conversation about the good life.
Yeah, well, it seems I can always talk about myself, say something. And yeah, interesting. You say it's not about craniosacral therapy. But in a way, to me, everything is, it's all influenced by that. So it's part of who I am. And, you can probably tell by, what you read, Broderick. I'm someone who's very interested in the body and being embodied and how we become embodied, from conception on or even before conception on. And that the craniosacral comes into that, and the movement work comes into that also. But it's just every moment comes into that in a way, So maybe I'll talk about this later, but I'm just feeling inspired to say, because I'm feeling my breath, and every breath is like a birth, As I breathe in, I'm coming into form, and I breathe out, I'm moving out of form. And so I guess part of how I might introduce myself in this moment is I'm someone who looks at life in these odd ways. I like to think they're deep ways, but maybe they're odd ways. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awesome.
I'm curious
That's
what we're going to
awesome.
talk about.
That's awesome. Me too. So let's jump right on in. So, what does living well mean to you? What's your personal take on that?
Yeah, I love that question. Who asked that question? Well, you do, obviously, but it's not a question that gets asked a lot in our world. And and to me, it has a
Mm-hmm.
lot to do with being present in the body and being that I think enables us to be present with each other and to be present with each other in a compassionate way. And compassion has a lot to do with living well to me. Um, I see a lot of suffering in the world happening, I think, because people are disconnected from themselves, disconnected from their bodies, from their hearts. And compassion comes from here in the heart. You know, if I don't have compassion for another person, I might not be kind to them. And and that leads to suffering. And if someone's suffering and I have compassion, I might be able to help them. And probably I'd have a desire to do that. So to me, living well has a lot to do with where we live from. We can live from various ideas, but they don't feel as important to me if they're not embodied. They're not coming from inside. So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally makes sense. I like it. I love it. I think I love how, as you even introduce yourself, you're speaking to this presence with oneself and being embodied. And what we mean by embodied, folks, of course, you're embodied, but to be present and to be aware and sensitive to your embodiment.
Yeah,
And I like how you say translate to others, being present with others, and how that is related to compassion. And compassion is such an important piece of living well to you. I think it's important as well, to be present with each other and to have care and concern for one another is an important piece of the puzzle. It's hard to experience joy and happiness in a vacuum. I think
yeah,
we live in a world where we have impact and we have an influence on each other. And if we can be present with each other, just to start with, let's see what happens from there.
yeah, yeah. It could be beautiful. And to me, that's part of being human.
Right?
That's part of being human. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're relational beings, and we might learn
Absolutely.
to not be so relational and to not be so present because of various things,
Mm-hmm.
various conditions that we encounter, traumas we experience. But it's our birthright, if you will. It's our potential. I think a lot about our original potential. I like to say our original embryological potential. I'm interested in the embryo, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the embryo teaches us a lot. And we think about how we start out, and the sperm and the egg come together, and we're this little tiny unicellular organism, and that apparently simple organism develops into these complex bodies. Like, what's up with that? How does that happen? That's incredible potential.
Right?
And along the way, we often get
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from our potential. And so, asking
Mm-hmm.
what is living well, what is living well, what's the good life, that brings us back to our potential. So, like in craniosacral work, comes out of osteopathy. Um, there's a basic uh, principle, way of looking at things, where we orient to the health. Like there's always health present, even if someone, comes in with a lot of pain, there's health there. And so we practice orienting to that. And to me, that helps us to live well, and then we can do
Mm-hmm.
that with each other. So maybe I meet somebody that I I don't like so much, or doesn't like me, which is perhaps even worse. It's like maybe they want to do something to me and my people. It's like, well, what can I, if I can find a place of compassion and see the good in them, see the health in them. Maybe they're acting the way they're acting because of something that happened to them or to their community, their people, that they had to react that way. And I might not like it, but maybe I can meet them from that place and keep looking for where's the good there. And I'm a therapist. How can I support the good there?
Hmm.
So there's hope.
I love it. I love even. Yeah, I know, right? I love how you start with that there's health there, and
Mm,
I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, and knowing that yeah, even though there may be a disturbance in the fields, the disturbance in the quality of one's life at that moment, or the state of one's life in that moment, but there's health there as well, and how do we orient our attention towards it? And I love that. I like how that, and I think that's deep because it extends to everything. How do we orient our attention in the direction of health in ourselves that's present, the healthy relationships that is present as potential, as a highly probable possibility as well, in terms of relationships relating to one another, and how important it is for us to mm, open ourselves up to that possibility and orient our attention to that possibility
mm,
of that again comes back to compassion. I think it's such an important piece of the living well puzzle.
yes.
Yeah, and you're speaking to you mentioned earlier we're relational beings. We actually I dare say need each other. And I think even if we don't feel like we need each other, but we do. And if we open ourselves up to each other, even when sometimes someone mistreats you or someone has a negative opinion of you, I love how you say that if there's health present in me, there's health present in them. And how can I orient my attention to the health in them and try to understand and not justify, but try to understand their behavior and see, that's a learned behavior. That's something that they've learned out of their experience. And how can I open myself up to the possibility of trying to understand
Mm,
why they may be behaving that way? And I guess that's that compassion again.
yeah. It's not always so easy. I look at what's happening in our world today,
Mm-mm.
like various politicians um, in both of our countries. It's like, how do I have compassion
Yeah.
for some of the behavior I see going on? Um, but there's health there too,
Yeah.
somewhere, you know,
Yeah. Absolutely.
I hope.
Everyone is deserving of compassion, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Even when we feel like this is craziness, but or even when I'm acting crazy, I'm like, wow, I'm acting a fool right now for whatever reason. I mean, I don't think I do that too often, but I'm open to me acting a fool for some strange reason. And if I am, and like for me, I wouldn't like that. So let me be a little more compassionate towards myself. Like, why would I be doing this? What has led me to behave in this uncharacteristic way, and have that compassion for myself because I am deserving of that compassion myself. And so I think that's an important piece of it as well, having compassion for ourselves. And I guess that requires that embodied presence that you're speaking of,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and then extend that compassion out to others.
Yeah. And, I think often that's much harder to give ourselves compassion. We expect a lot of ourselves.
Hmm.
And again, I think we've learned that.
Hmm.
But, just to come back to my passion for prenatal and birth psychology and therapy. And, I talk a lot about what happens to little ones in the womb and around the time of birth, or when they're babies after birth, and that babies, even in the womb, have awareness. They're sentient beings. They experience things. And so what's being said and done around them or to them affects them. And, I have a mission to increase awareness about that. And what I found, when I was a younger um, graduate student, I was so excited about all these ideas and I would tell everybody, and I found people getting angry at me, because they thought I was blaming them. And it never occurred to me to blame anybody. We act out our own history and we do what the best. I think we all do the best we know how to do. Maybe, we live a lot of ignorance also.
Mm-hmm.
But with compassion, we can look deeper and learn more about ourselves, even as well as the other. And then there's the possibility of taking in information and going, oh, maybe I could have done this differently, like a parent who's feeling guilty about what's happened to their child. It's like, well, maybe I could have done this differently, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I did my best.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I acknowledge what happened, then the child, whatever age, has the possibility of having some repair and um, just having their experience acknowledged and reflected. It can be so healing and so liberating. Whereas if we're too busy
Mm-hmm.
protecting our image of ourselves, we can't do that. There's something in our hearts hardened. And then we can't be so compassionate and
Mm-hmm.
kind to ourselves or to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is great. I think, boy, you touched on something big here. I think with this idea of bringing these ideas, and I want to touch on more about the prenatal stuff in a minute too. But I can't help but to comment on this idea that talking about these things and saying that a lot of our actions and behaviors derive from our past, and acknowledging our actions and behaviors that may be unsavory for whatever reason. Now there's a broad spectrum of that. Some unsavory behavior is just awful and harmful to others, and some of it is not, and mostly harmful to ourselves. And but when you bring that up, sometimes people want to protect themselves by rejecting any observation of it, any noticing. Like, I don't want to own this behavior. I don't want to own uh, these things that are happening in my life. I don't want to take responsibility. I mean, I get the impulse, and I think what happens, you mentioned briefly about politics and a lot of the cultural things that's going on here in the United States as well as in England too. I think, and a lot of the a lot of times, in the process of trying to protect ourselves, we take on this victim status. I am a victim of the world and my circumstances. That's part of it, absolutely. But that's not all you are.
Right.
We relinquish our power when we emphasize our victimhood, overly emphasize our victimhood, I should say. And then we relinquish our power when we do that, I think. And then the minute someone says something to us about taking responsibility in a way that's only going to help us, we get rejected, we get upset when someone like you coming. Some people get mad at their therapists about calling them out on stuff, or not in a negative way, but just kind of say, "Hey, this is what's happening." Have self compassion and try to work through it. But when we put ourselves in this box as a victim, we're not going to be able to see it. It's almost like we can separate ourselves from our immediate experiences and put ourselves and identify ourselves in this particular category. And it's a form of bypass, it's a form of escaping. I know it's in certain circles, it's culture, socially advantageous in certain contexts, believe it or not, to play the victim role. But I think that maybe that pendulum has swung too far, where we overly emphasize victimhood and not enough of an emphasis on, for lack of a better phrase, self-responsibility or taking ownership on the patterns of behavior that I may be engaged in. Because if I don't take ownership on it, then how am I going to heal from it? It's going to be very difficult because no one can do it for me. They can support me, they can help me, but I don't think anybody can do it for me, particularly with psychological stuff,
Yeah.
patterns of behavior. Does that make any sense? Or am I just babbling here? I just kind of fed off of what you said and kind
If it's
of brought that
babbling,
to
it
my
makes total
attention.
sense to me. Um, but yeah, I have two responses to that. And one is, like, over the years, I think I've learned to introduce people to things more gently and compassionately, not just coming from the need of my
Yeah.
passion to express it all and tell the world, but, helping people to maybe open up a little bit to the possibility, and
Yeah.
also to be able to see that, whatever they did back then, of course that's what they did, because that was the circumstance. They were responding to it.
Exactly.
But then my other response comes back to the body. So if I think about, I love what you're saying about, the victimhood, I want to call it, um, that we can identify with being a victim, and then we forget about everything else about ourselves. And so I come
Exactly.
back to the body. And one of the things I learned from craniosacral therapy is my teacher, um, I studied with John and Anna Chitty, who were wonderful teachers. And um, they taught us that, we're with somebody, we want to help them to orient to the health, to what, at least what feels okay in their body. Right. So they come in, they're going, oh, I have this terrible pain, or, this terrible thing is happening. Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm sorry that's happening for you. And what feels okay in your body just now? What feels okay? And maybe something feels good, and that's even more helpful, but what feels okay at least? And, somebody comes in with this painful shoulder, and that's all they can think about. You ask that question, and they go, what? And I go, yeah, something feel okay. And they go, well, my other shoulder feels okay, and my the big toe on my left foot feels okay. And before you know it, everything else is okay except that shoulder, right? But they're so focused there that they've lost touch with that. And we do the same thing.
Yeah.
One of the other things I practice is Continuum, which is a kind of mindful movement practice developed by my dear mentor, Emily Conrad. And she taught us to ask a really helpful question, I find, which is what else? Meaning, what else is present or what else is possible? And we do that with our movement. We're observing how our body's moving, but we can do that with anything, you know. So again, I'm focused on being a victim. Okay, so that's part of the reality. And what else is possible?
Mm-hmm.
But I might also check in with my body. When I think about being a victim, I know not everybody would probably be able to see this, but I kind of hunch my shoulders and I cave in my chest,
Yeah.
and it feels tight. It doesn't feel very good. I kind of hunch my head, and I'm not, it connects with shame with me. It's like, I don't even want to look at you, right? As if I say, well, what else? Then I start to feel my backbone, and I start to straighten up, and I realize, oh, I can move. I got that. I can breathe. There's something else. I'm not just that victim sensation in my body. So I might, start to open up a
Mm-hmm.
bit, go, what is this? Oh, well, this is power. This is my, not power over, but
Exactly.
power. This is health also, another aspect of health. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I had to be a victim. Like, I grew up with a very abusive father. My father was mentally ill, and which I think has had a big influence on who I am and what I do. And so, yeah, I was his victim because he was abusive. But I realized even back then, I think it's my nature kind of to orient to the health. It's like he was also the one that gave me love and could see me. My mother didn't feel present at all. She was like so dissociative. She just wasn't really there. I never felt like I bonded with her until I was 50 years old. It's amazing that can happen when you're that old.
Mm-hmm.
But um, but what really saved me was that I bonded with my father, and I received his love when he was not acting so crazy and abusive. He was very loving and supportive, kind of supportive. Um, but he could see me, and it helped me to see who I was. And so I wasn't just being the victim, even back then. I learned how to be a victim, right? And because I couldn't fight back when he was abusing me. And, maybe that's come in useful sometimes in my life. There's times to fight back, and there's times maybe not to. I don't know, that takes some wisdom to sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Right.
right, but, to be able to experience love, I got some sense of being loved. I got some sense of having some value. And we need that. We all need that. So if I were to say, I didn't know how to
Mm-hmm.
say what else then, but if the what else would have been his love. Yeah. I've never
Mm-hmm.
said that quite that way before. So I'm not sure how that lands. How does that land?
Amazing. You're touching on so much there. I think you said a lot there, a whole lot. And I think one of them is, a lot of what you're saying is we can hold multiple things at one time.
Yeah.
We can hold our pain, but I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. We can also hold the health that's there as well. I love that analogy of the shoulder pain, but the other rest of the body is okay. But that shoulder is hurting. I can hold all of it. I can hold multiple things at one time. Multiple things can be happening at once. And I don't have to just be the shoulder pain. I don't have to identify just with the shoulder pain. And you're so right. When we are embodied, when we are present in our body, we can sense all the rest of it as well, not just that. And I know that's very loud. The thing that we're suffering from is very loud.
Mm.
And it does require some kind of training of some sort to learn how to listen to the other um, aspects of our experience and not just that one thing that is screaming loud. What is the background noise? Can we tap into it? Can we see what's present there? Maybe we can and hold all of these things together at one time. And I think that you said something very profound, I think. And I was going to ask you a little bit about your history and of how did you get here? How did you see things this way? And you mentioned this about your father, where he was abusive in one context, but I've never heard anyone say it like this. But he was also the person that gave you love, that showed you what love was, and that saw you for who you were.
Mm.
Those multiple, again, that's a big indication of multiple things can happen at one time, at the
Mm.
same time. And we can hold multiple things at the same time. They don't necessarily happen at the same time, but we can hold those things.
Yeah.
We can hold the pain, the suffering, but we can also hold the love as well. And then we have to, I think you're right, it does require some wisdom to tease out those things. But I think that you said something really important I mean, I took it, and that's something I'm going to reflect on. It's like, exactly, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Mm.
Sometimes the people in our lives that cause us so much harm and trauma and kind of quote unquote messed us up psychologically are the very people that sometimes have seen us for who we are and that loved us and held us. And it makes you think what you said earlier about, well, we don't know what they were going through when they caused that pain and suffering in the lives of other people. We have no idea what led them to be that way. I'm not justifying it, but I think even having that compassion for them, we can have that compassion for ourselves. And then we allow ourselves to heal, to break free from the traumatic experience. Because you can definitely hold on to, yeah, my father was abusive and I'm a survivor, or I'm a victim of that abuse, and I've survived that abuse, and that becomes your identity. That becomes how you see yourself, as a survivor of abuse. That's one aspect,
Mm.
but there's this other aspect too that
Yeah.
you just brought up
Yes.
that could offer us a lens into the complexity of being a human being
Mm.
and how challenging it is to be a human being, and
Mm.
how challenging it is for a mind such as you yourself, growing up in a world where your mother wasn't present with you, your father was, but at the same time you don't know what you're going to get.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a lot of complexity to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think most of us listeners, if you're listening, I mean, I can say something similar, not the same experience that you had, of course, but I've
Mm.
had a complex upbringing, challenging in many ways, beautiful in other ways, from the same individuals, from the same environment, traumatic experiences, and also some of the most wonderful experiences, all in one same context,
Mm.
a similar environment, rather, and in the context of that each situation is slightly different,
Mm.
but the background context is the same.
Yes.
And we can have all of that at the same time. And then let's take a look at that. Let's take a look and explore that with compassion for ourselves and others. And this is why I love craniosacral,
Mm.
what it teaches. So all these embodied practices is that when you're really embodied and present in your body, boy, the potential for healing is amazing. You can sense and feel and work through so much
Mm.
because you can feel into that complexity. Even if you can't necessarily name it, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, I certainly wasn't able to do that when I was younger. You know, um,
No. Yeah.
there was like my father abusing me, and then there were other times there was my father who was, my father who loved me. As a young child, I couldn't put those two together. I couldn't hold the whole. There was one or the other.
Exactly.
And, years of therapy. And I went through a time, of being the victim, identifying as the victim. It's like, wow, as I was, really taking in how the abuse affected me, um, I felt like a victim. That's who I was. And I couldn't function very well because of it. And then a few more years of therapy and meditation, and it started to shift, and I started to learn to ask, well, what else? What feels okay? Oh, there's health here. Start to hold more of the whole. And I'm sorry, I
Mm-hmm.
always come back to pre and perinatal experience. As I began learning about how our very early experience affects us, I started to have more compassion for my father, because he had always been
Yeah.
told he was an accident. It was pointed out to me he wasn't an accident, his conception was an
Mm.
accident, right? But he was told he was an accident. His
Mm.
parents, he was born in the 20s during, Depression years. His parents were poor immigrants. They already had three kids. They couldn't afford another one. And his mother had breast cancer. I think she had a breast removed while he was in the womb, which is pretty intense, um, both for
Mm.
her and for him. And so, he had these very depressed parents who were overworked, not interested in him, and lived in a world that was kind of depressed and, well, probably underworked. A lot of people didn't have work, right? But, there's stress everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? And um, like he was one of those kids who, well, I don't know if you've heard of this, he used to talk about how they'd stuff newspaper in their shoes because their shoes had holes in them. This was in Winnipeg in Canada. It's cold, 40 below in the winter. You don't want holes in your shoes.
Oh
So they couldn't
yeah.
afford new shoes. So this is the world he grew up in. It was really harsh.
Mm.
And he had nobody
Yeah.
for him.
Mm.
So of course he turned out the way he did, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I can have compassion. I I can forgive him for what he did. I'm not, well, in some ways, I'm grateful that I had that background because it's led me to be who I am. I don't condone what he did, but he couldn't do anything else. I don't think he wasn't in his body, right, to be able to make other choices. And because of what he did, I certainly wasn't in my body. I feel like I lived the first 20, 25 years of my life from here up. I was very intellectual. Um, and I learned to come
Mm.
down in here and feel the pain. And that enables me to actually be with other people's
Mm-hmm.
pain and not be so judgmental of it. And I actually feel
Mm-hmm.
my heart soften when I say that. I feel grateful that I get to do that in this life. I get to be with people in a more loving,
Mm-hmm.
compassionate way because it's not fun to be judgmental, to hate everybody or, to see others as less than you in some way. That's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard work because it's not true.
Mm-mm.
You have to keep concocting that story for
Yeah.
yourself, right?
Yeah. Wow, you're sharing some really beautiful stuff here. I think
Oh, thank you.
it's a big lesson for all of us. Really listening to each other and listening to ourselves. And so when I say listening, I'm not just saying listening to words, like you're really listening to your father when you try to understand what happened to him, what led him to be that way. If you never really open yourself to understanding his story and what he went through, again, and I love how you reminded us this doesn't mean you say, oh yeah, that was great, that was okay. No, that's not what you're saying at all.
Yeah.
And so we can look at that, we can have compassion. It doesn't mean we agree with behavior. He responded in that way. Put yourself in that place. That's where empathy comes into play, at least the cognitive empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of that person. How you think you would have responded to that situation? Now, I know it's easy for us to say that especially when we come in from a place of self-righteousness. It's easy for us to say that, oh, I would have responded in this way and I would have treated my kids different because I went through that. Great. But he didn't. A lot of our parents didn't. A lot of our relatives didn't. A lot of the people who caretakers didn't. Our teachers, all of these people that have impacted us in our lives, we don't know what led to them to have a bad moment with us or multiple bad moments with us. We don't know. A lot of bad moments for with certain individuals where they're so traumatized, they're so gone that they're just caused a lot of harm in the lives of others. That doesn't mean I agree with their behavior, but I try to understand. I
Yes.
try to have that compassion. And because you said something that's important, because you can soften around it. You can better understand yourself in the process because the process that you went through of could not disconnected from yourself, disconnected from your body, identifying yourself, even if you didn't do it cognitively or subconsciously, as the victim. How did it affect your body? How did it affect your mood, the way your energy is? I love you gave that analogy of the body when you're the chest, the chest is sunken in, the shoulders rolling forward, the head tilted down, walking through the world in that way, focusing, orienting our attention on all the problems that we've had in our lives, that our suffering. And you're saying, well, there's more to it. And I think understanding is a lot of what you're saying, and in being open to that understanding, but also being open to the beautiful in your life, the good, the positive, not denying the negative. And for you to say, not necessarily are you glad that you had that past, but you're grateful for it because it is allow you to be where you are today, and for you to see the way you see, and to hold and have that compassion for others. And for me, what you just described, what you just shared, is a powerful lesson for all of us listening to that. Well, how do we take what you're saying and learn from it? How do we look at our lives, as imperfect as it has been, as painful it is as it has been? How do we translate that pain into something beautiful? How do we transmute it into something beautiful, and take it and mold ourselves in a way that enhances the goodness in the world as a result of that? In your case, you're working with people, caring for them. Yeah. Can you, I know you mentioned it, but I would love for you to, and I think the story you gave is wonderful, way of understanding it. If you can say a little bit more, because you keep coming back to it, prenatal, perinatal, the in the womb stuff, and how that has informed and affected us, and how that is, what do you say?
Whatever that word is.
Oh, yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I know. So, yeah, the embryological aspects of ourselves. So, can you, our embryological history, can you say some more about that and how that relates to healing and the good life or living well?
Well, I'd love to. That's my passion, you know. um, yeah. So, well, you know, we all start out in the womb, right? We've all had that experience. And I got really fascinated with that time in life when I was, well, actually, I started to get fascinated about it when it started to come in on its own. I was doing massage therapy, and I think it was twice in 1 week. I had like a 6 foot something guy. I'm 5 feet, just over 5 feet. You know, I'm not a big person, but having these big 6 foot something guys birth themselves off my massage table. And somehow I supported them in coming off the massage table as their body started to move and they started to do their birth process, coming off of the table. And somehow we both knew what was going on. And that was shortly before I went to Naropa to study dance movement psychotherapy, somatic psychotherapy. And what I discovered there is that you can't do work in the body without encountering pre-verbal experience, which includes our
Mm,
experience around the time of birth and even before birth. And as part of our coursework there, we had a course that was called something like Birth and Death in Body Centered Psychotherapy. I was like, oh, this is it. It was comparing birth and death, which are like two portals, you know, coming into life, moving out of life. They happen in very similar ways. And what happens in our modern world is they tend to get isolated, you know, medicalized. They happen in hospital a lot, and they become scary. But what I discovered is that it doesn't have to be like that. I started hanging out with midwives and going to births and, seeing different ways of that happening and learning more about the health. We talk about the blueprint in pre and perinatal psychology. So it's like if an architect is designing a building, they draw a blueprint, right? And that's the design. And then the builders build the building according to that blueprint, right? The blueprint is how it's designed to be. So we also have a design, we have a blueprint. And we're designed to come into a field of safety and welcome. But it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes the builders mess up and they don't quite follow the blueprint, right? That happens in our lives. A lot of things can happen. So it's not unusual, for example, when a pregnancy is discovered, for the parents to have some ambivalence. Even if they wanted to have a child, they might go, whoa, I'm not ready for this. It's like, oh, I needed to get a job first or finish school or, get married or whatever it is. Or, I've had people say, I just wanted to take that trip to Tibet, and now I can't do it for another 20 years, right? Um, so, they really wanted their child, but there's ambivalence. And sometimes it's much worse than ambivalence. The child's really rejected and not wanted, like my father. But for the child, the baby is completely dependent on their parents, especially their mother, welcoming them. They're dependent on that for their survival, because they can't survive without her. And they somehow have a sense of that rejection or that ambivalence. And it's terrifying for them. So they kind of often get small so they won't be discovered. Or they try to be really good babies, not move too much so they don't disturb things. They, act in a way so that they're wanted. So it's like they give up some of their authenticity right then and there. That's really common. Most pregnancies aren't actually planned, even if the parents want to have a baby. So, there's bound to be something going on. But there are lots of other things that happen prenatally that are also can potentially quite traumatizing. And so I got really fascinated. Part of my background is as an occupational therapist, where I learned about developmental milestones, for children. I realized there's developmental milestones in the womb as well. And that we have to get through these various challenges in order to survive. So you and I have gotten through those challenges, So we survived, but it might not have been the conditions for us to thrive. So I work a lot with people who have various issues that can be tracked back to, their time before they were even born, when something or other was happening. And it might be something like not specifically their parents, but the culture they're living in, like living with racism and discrimination, that's an ongoing stress. Or with war, I think about, God, I feel so sad when I think about babies being born in the Ukraine the last few years, or now in Palestine. It's like their surround, their context is incredibly stressful. That's an understatement. They're surrounded by trauma. And so, of course, their parents are affected and they're affected. And they are preparing to live in the world that their mother lives in. So babies in the womb are designed to be able to sense when their mother feels stressed. So if the mother goes through very extreme or chronic stress, the baby's stress responses are actually altered, and they tend to be more sensitive to stress throughout life, which can affect, of course, their physical health as well. So I'm totally fascinated by that time in life and just how important it is. Like I say, my big mission in life is just to bring awareness to that. And also the time of birth, like so much happens at birth that can be traumatizing as well, and just after birth.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to bring awareness to that so that we can address it, so that we can acknowledge that, yeah, you had a difficult beginning, or that time when your parents found out that you were there, that was really hard and you were really scared. And then the person can start to rest more, go, oh, yes, that's what I felt my entire life. And it's not because again, not because I'm a bad person. I just came at a time when they weren't expecting me. Right? So it just feels like such a juicy time in life. And yeah, other things happen after birth too, but they don't tend to be as unacknowledged. We can see what happens after birth. They used to be more unacknowledged, but I think the world has come to a place where, for the most part, in our modern world, we acknowledge when there's trauma for children and that might affect them.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still at the very
Mm-hmm.
beginning stages of even beginning to think that little ones in the womb, before they develop the ability to talk, before they develop a brain like we have, that they can be experiencing things, let alone that can affect them for life.
Yeah.
So that's my mission, to bring that out of the shadows, shine the light on it. That's my new book coming out next year, The Prenatal Shadow. It just seems to me that our prenatal and birth experience is almost by definition unconscious shadow material, because for the most part, nobody acknowledges it and nobody reflects it. I tell a story in
Mm-hmm.
my book. I'm just in the middle of editing the book, so I'm really with it right now. Um, like if a toddler is taken to the zoo and the next day they draw a picture of an elephant, probably they show it with great excitement to their mother, and their mother says, oh yeah, that's the elephant we saw yesterday. And remember, we also saw a giraffe. It had a really long neck, right? So she's reflecting to them and reinforcing their experience, bringing it into words. So then it can become conscious and verbal,
Mm-hmm.
and they can talk about it. But if toddlers often talk about their birth or their experience in the womb, and some parents are receptive to that. And in some parts of the world, I think they're more receptive to that. But for the most part, they'll go, oh, isn't that cute? Or, don't talk such nonsense. Or, oh, let's play with this toy,
Mm-hmm.
like distract them because they don't understand it, right? So then it doesn't get
Mm-hmm.
reflected or reinforced. And the child learns they don't talk about that stuff. So it goes in back there somewhere in shadow until they meet someone like me and
Yeah.
we shine the light on it.
That's awesome. That's good stuff. I think that, thank you for sharing all that, because you would think that we would be doing more of that this would be more, we would be more conscious of this type of thing. But I think a lot of times in our culture, we don't give enough attention to psychology. There's branches of psychology and therapists and everything out there in the world. But I think we don't understand the psychological impact of in utero, of a human being in utero, and the various effects that the mother has on the child in utero. A lot of times we think we reduce it to just, oh, nutrition, make sure you're getting the right, you make sure you get your folic acid, make sure you get all of the various nutrients that you need, make sure you do a little exercise, and the baby is going to be healthy. And they popped out, yep, it physically looks good. All right, we're good to go. And not even any attention on the other aspects of it. And I'm glad that you're doing that, because that's going to impact the quality of of that child's life, that human being's life for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Giving attention to this for people out there who are planning to have kids, to think about this kind of thing, and those of us who, of course, who made it through that, can we go back and reflect on that and see if there are some aspects of that experience that is limiting us in some way, limiting our capacity to thrive and live healthily, uh, healthy in this moment. So that's this is good stuff that you're doing, and really really important that you're shining a light on this.
See, I see that as part of living
So I
well,
have exactly, big
holding the
time.
whole, part
Yeah.
of holding the, yeah.
Living well, I think we a lot of the living well, or the good life. Reason why I come back to saying living well, even though I try to use those terms, those phrases interchangeably, the good life, living well, because sometimes when we say the good life, we tend to think it's just all about all the joyful moments. And it's all about, oh, it's just the peace, the happy, the beautiful, all the positive side of things. But living well is also healing. It's also facing the shadow. It's also overcoming those patterns that are limiting us. It's also learning, it's growing. It's a whole bunch of different things. It's not just feeling good. Feeling good is only a part of it. So, a part of living well or the good life. It also includes working through our history of suffering, starting in the womb, starting at conception, and thinking about that, because all of those factors in our experience, our precognitive experience, at least our pre-linguistic experience, is affecting us. That's a part of our programming, that's operating, that's influencing and impacting our choices and impacting the quality of our lives. And it's important that we give attention to the full spectrum of our experience.
Yes.
And I'm glad that for those of us as adults, but also those who are planning to have children, and thinking about everything that you're doing as a partnership, uh, when you are when that child is in the womb, is being impacted, every emotion, because you have chemicals in your body, hormones that are affecting nutrients being provided to the child, everything, all kinds of things. I want to get into all of the physiology of this, but your psychology, not just your nutrition and exercise, but the quality of your mental state, are also affecting that child in the womb. That's going to put them on a trajectory for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's great that you're giving attention to that.
Thanks. I'm glad you appreciate that. If I could say one
So
other thing about it, can I say one other thing? Just that,
yeah,
also
absolutely.
for those people that want to bring children into the world, it can be so helpful to look at their own early experience and, do whatever
Hmm.
healing they need to do, because we tend to pass on to the next generation what we experienced. So that can be a gift to their children as well.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. Yes. 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 This is great. This is good stuff, man. We can just go I can we can pull a Joe Rogan on this, and talk for 3 hours. But we are we are coming to a close. At least right now I'm keeping it down to about around an hour or so. But we'll see where it goes. Because I think this type of a conversation is important. I think that we just scratched the surface here,
Mm,
and exploring what living well means to you. I think that there is a lot there that you touched on that can be we can dig into different aspects of those things that you brought up. We'll hold off until our next conversation. I have more questions, but I'm just going to hold off. I hope that we can do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But I do want to ask one final. Go ahead.
I'd love to do it again.
I didn't hear.
I
Oh,
would
okay,
love to do
awesome.
it again.
Sorry, I didn't hear. Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, thank you. That would be great. I do have one question I want to ask to close. Are there any final thoughts you would like to leave for the audience? Anything? It could be anything you would like to share.
Hmm. Well,
Sum up your take.
what I feel moved to say is to be kind to ourselves and each other. It kind of sums up what we've been talking about. And that, as I think, Broderick, I think you've really underlined um, the the aspect of including all of us. The whole. I talk about holding the whole, not just a part. Not just the pain in the shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole thing. So when we look at what else is there, then we can access the resource and all that, and from that place, we can have an intention to support whatever hurts. And then the shoulder might start to soften. Doesn't have to hold it all. The shoulder is symbolic for whatever it is, you know. So I actually believe that if we are able to be gentler and kinder in how we bring little ones into the world, we can eventually get to a place where we don't have to have wars. We can live in more peace and harmony and love. I might start sounding like a hippie here, but um, that's my wish. Peace,
No,
harmony,
that's great. It's okay to sound like a. Oh, that's great. It's okay to sound like a hippie. It's okay to sound like a scientist or whatever. If they're good ideas, I don't give a shit where they come from. And I think that what you're saying is great. And I think it's super important. And I take that serious. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because I want to see more peace and love in the world, and trying to inspire these types of conversations so that we can transform ourselves. We can just rethink about how we see things. And I'm 100% agree with you. If we can get this thing started very early, and it starts with us right now. You never know who's listening to this, who may take this in, and they're in the process of planning to have kids, and they can take this into consideration. And I don't think it's foo-foo to suggest that if we do more of this stuff, we can minimize unnecessary violence in the world. I'm with you. This has been great, Cherionna. You're amazing, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And I really do hope to have you back on, and let's dig more into your work. That would be great.
Well, thank you. Thank you also for the work you're doing. This feels like such, you have important conversations here, and hopefully it does have some effect. And I think it does have effect on people. So thank you. I really appreciate you too. And yeah, I'd love to come back. To be continued.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.